I'd say the biggest challenge in terms of filmmaking was the underwater tunnels.
Months of training, hours underwater, and facing intense fears were all part of a regular day at work for the cast filming underwater scenes for the Harry Potter films.
Oh, I'm a terrible swimmer. I'm really, really bad.
While he was filming the underwater portion of the Triwizard tournament, Daniel Radcliffe wound up suffering 2 ear infections due to all the time spent under the chilly water. In tests, the team had tried to strap Radcliffe upside down in the water so his hair would float up, but it wound up not being an ideal way to work, so they scrapped it. Since the giant filming tank wasn't even heated, it's no surprise the actors weren't fans and Radcliffe suffered so many ear infections. The frozen part of the lake that Harry retrieves the Sword of Gryffindor from in the Deathly Hallows was actually plexiglass with frosted detailing to make it look frozen from the top. Beneath, they had real water, and when filming shots looking upwards from under the lake, the top of the ice we see is actually melted wax that floats on the water. While the underwater scenes look like they were set in the bottom of a lake, they were actually filming everything in a giant pool surrounded with blue screen backgrounds so CGI could be done afterwards.
That, of course, was hugely challenging.
The pool was built especially for the production. It was the deepest underwater tank for filming in Europe, 20 feet deep by 60 square feet and able to hold an impressive 500,000 liters of water. The massive tank had a filtration system to manage the chlorine levels, keeping it more pure than mineral water, which helped in keeping the water clear for filming, and it made it much less irritating for the actors' eyes. When doing these underwater shots, the team didn't plan to record more than around 10 seconds at a time.
That's as long as you can do without air and keeping your eyes open.
Giving Radcliffe the opportunity to take a break and grab some oxygen from a tank when he needed it.
On 3, I'd blow all the air that I could out of my lungs.
Not only did he have to swim and act underwater, Radcliffe actually had to speak, but his dialogue wasn't recorded while filming in the giant tank. He had to say the line,
"But she's my friend Timmy!"
and his mouth filled right up with water, but luckily it wasn't too rough of an experience. When it came time to record his dialogue, a much smaller crate was filled with water, and Radcliffe would put his face in it, speaking into an underwater microphone that was hooked up in the tank.
You're sure about this, Neville?
Absolutely.
For an hour?
Most likely.
Whenever the Harry Potter actor was filming scenes after when he would have consumed gillyweed and needed to show off gills and webbed feet, an hour and a half of time was spent in the makeup chair with tricky-to-work-with silicone prosthetics. The job had to be thorough since the prosthetics needed to be extra secure to stay in place underwater amidst all the intense action. As for the filaments inside the gills, silk material wound up being used instead of any prosthetic because of just how well the fabric moves underwater. Radcliffe's mind was blown as he encountered and made use of the underwater sanctuaries used when the Goblet of Fire was filming. He felt like a fascinated 5-year-old using the underwater habitat, which was essentially a small tank underwater with windows and a chimney. But it allowed a person to take off their mask and to be kept dry and out of water for a minute between takes. The Harry Potter actor described it as a low-budget version of the Big Brother diary room. Radcliffe definitely was never on his own underwater. A 20-person diving team helped make the magic happen in the tank safely and efficiently. One of them was just there to make sure there weren't any bubbles in the actor's face or hair. Since it was so difficult to film in these conditions, small roles like the divers in charge of air regulators and every single camera crew member played a significant part in making everything run smoothly. 42 hours is nearly the amount of time Radcliffe spent underwater filming for the 4th movie alone, sometimes spending up to 3 hours underwater at a time. 6 months were dedicated to scuba training alone and 6 weeks for filming the scenes.
We obviously wanted to get as much practice in as possible for the underwater stuff.
Radcliffe's incredible stunt double David Holmes mapped out what the course should be underwater for the actor and went through the whole routine with Radcliffe until he knew it well enough to perform. A ton of CGI was done to create different kinds of plants to appear underwater as part of the dark and dank environment they imagined it to be deep in a giant Scottish loch.
It was so vast.
Since the water was naturally so clear, they had to muddy up the quality of the visuals underwater consistently. The merpeople were tricky because they needed to look like mythical creatures while still coming across as intimidating.
Each creature is designed because virtually nothing is from the real world.
They wound up looking like deep water merpeople with creepy fish-like mouths. The Grindylows were created with CGI, but when actually filming, Radcliffe was being tugged at by two stuntmen in blue water suits, who were grappling at him to help him depict the scene realistically. The Victor Krum actor had a huge phobia of deep water and swimming, but then he did Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where he had to face his fears.
You know when you're breathing that oxygen underwater, and you breathe it too fast and too heavily.
To help Ionescu get over his deepest fear, the actor would practice in the shower, allowing the water falling down from the shower head to overwhelm him so he could channel being in the giant tank. Robert Pattinson had some struggles as well, becoming very disoriented underwater and unaware of which direction he was really looking in and what scenes would look like on camera.
The main thing that really sort of was a bit frustrating was the fact that communication is obviously quite difficult.
Since Radcliffe was underwater, every message or note the director had was passed along through a chain, making the process far less efficient.
Underwater, it's not as easy as that, you know?
It also meant Radcliffe had to be completely concentrated while he was working.
I like to think I did okay, but I just can't be certain.
Every shot from the underwater scenes began with a blue screen background that was lit from behind and then saw the environment formulated from scratch. The blue screen wound up being extremely complex, especially for the electricians who had to deal with fluorescent tubes and cables all around water.
Nothing they could do with special effects would look as real as it does when you're doing it on camera.
Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, and Daniel Radcliffe all went through what wound up being one of the most annoying scenes to film together, being dropped into a freezing lake during the harshest months of winter. While normally they could wear layers, the actors needed to change right after the lake drop, meaning they had to wear as little clothing as we see them in on screen. They didn't have to do much acting. All those shivers are completely real. Rupert Grint was pretty preoccupied filming this frigid scene, believing his heart might have stopped beating from the cold. Underwater, the language is pretty different, and Radcliffe wasn't always clear on the best communication practices. He once accidentally gave a hand signal that meant,
"Quick, I'm drowning, get me up to the surface,"
and sent everyone into a panic, with the crew acting quickly to save him. Fortunately, it wasn't the other way around. Radcliffe had help whenever he needed it. For all his hard work, Radcliffe was given a professional diver's daily record book for Christmas.
that I ever did while filming, and the total time that I spent underwater was 41 hours and 38 minutes.
The actor was extremely proud of his diving work, and the memento has the times and lengths of each dive he made, giving an amazing detailed history of his journey. The whole dive crew also got a special Christmas photo, photoshopped for maximum holiday spirit. It clearly took a lot of work, money, and extremely skilled professionals, but the final result is definitely worth it, considering how incredibly realistic all the underwater scenes look. The actors had their work cut out for them and rose to the challenge, even though it might have scared some of them. Do you think you'd be able to do that while working underwater?